Okay, so in this second part, I think we will be getting questions as we go. If you prefer, if you like to make a question, just raise your hands, and I will bring you the microphone so we can record in the video your questions. Thank you.
Thanks. So this is where we left off, which is I quickly explained how this tile repeat works in our template. To be able to actually see this thing, this part of the template in action, because you can see that, okay, we have the H1, which has the context title. Again, context being the object that pyramid traversed to, the context description, and there we have Fab Collab as the title and welcome to Fab Collab, which is what we did put in the models pie, right? This is how we instantiated this root folder. So let us go back to the P shell to add. I'm going to call bin P shell development ini to add to my root again another folder. I'm going to call this one, actually let me first, I'll have to import for my models from x3 underscore templates models import folder, and then I'm going to say root hello. So I'm going to add a hello folder, which I call like this. And then I'm going to put into this subfolder of my root another folder. I'm going to call it Florence. And this one's going to have also a description, say. Okay, this is basically our model API right there. Alright, and the transaction stuff that we will use here to persist our changes. So this way we've now created a small folder structure with the root and then an item called hello, a folder, and then a folder inside of hello called Florence. And now we should be able to see this and also see the part of our template in action that was doing the looping over the child objects, right? Look at this folder PT. This is the repeat overall context.values, values being the standard dictionary values method, because we are inheriting from persistent mapping. We get this one, and then we get a link for each item. We use request.resource URL, which is a method to produce absolute URLs for each one of our items here. And notice that context and request, they're always available inside our templates already, so there's no need to pass the context or the request from the view. And now, so if I start up my application again, I should be able to, here, pserve again, should be able to see something more interesting. And that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing in the list of child items, I have a link now. I can click on it. So now I have the title of the subfolder. Notice the URL, right? So by now you should have a feeling of how traversal works. We're now looking at the context is now the hello folder, and we're now looking at that hello folder. So context.title will yield the hello folder, and context.values is going to give us Florence as the only item. And then we go here, and then we can see that folder and notice the URL again. Now it's /hello/Florence. So if you go click the home link, this is just a link to the root. Now what we wanted to do is we wanted to fix the breadcrumbs at the top here. So for this, I'm going to introduce you to the concept of template globals. This is something that you can use to provide functionality, utility functions for your templates, where which are useful for might be useful for all of your templates, so you can use them conveniently. The way we define these utility functions so that we can access them in our templates is we have to use a add global function. Take a look at the X3 templates example and go to templates py. So this is the templates py file inside the X3, and take a look at this, what's in there. You'll see that there is basically two things. Couple of imports. Then we have the templates utils class, which is the class that we want to make available to all of our templates. This is basically a utility, a collection of utility methods, utility functions for our template. And we're using the add global event subscriber to add an instance of this template utils class to our templates namespace. So what's happening here is that we say, by saying event and then assigning to the utils key, we can say that utils, the name utils now in any one of our templates should map to the template utils object. So this way we end up being able to use just utils.breadcrumbs. We can call any one of these methods that are defined on templates utils from our template. And that's quite convenient because we don't actually want to have a lot of code in our templates, right? Code is easier to test and everything. It's easier to program. These templates should care about representation, not so much about logic. So what we're doing here in the breadcrumbs method is we use pyramid's lineage function to get a list of what the lineage function, when called with a context, it will give you the context and then the parent of that context, and then as the third item the parent of that parent, and so on until there's no parent, so until you've reached the root. What we're doing in breadcrumbs is we use that lineage on our context, and then we will reverse that list so that the root object is in the first position, right? Which is convenient for our breadcrumbs because we can then just go over the list and then for each item, make a link or something like this. So what we do here is we return a list of model objects in the end, right? So each one of these is going to have title, description, and each one of these we're going to be able to use, just like in our folder PT example, to create a URL, right, to link to that item. So that's actually everything that we need to build a breadcrumbs, to fix our breadcrumbs. So using that, calling utils.breadcrumbs, like you can see in the templates py file, you should be able to get the list of items that you're interested in for the breadcrumbs, and then be able to, inside the templates master PT file, there is a section that says your code here, and this is just a static stuff that's not working. You should now maybe look at code that we've already used in folder PT to do the repetition. You should use code like this to repeat over the list of items in the breadcrumbs and then present the user with a link for each one of these items so that they can navigate up the tree of objects in your breadcrumbs. So if you want to do that, this is the code that you'll have to replace. And maybe I'm going to give you 5 minutes to complete this. Does that make sense? If you have any questions, you can ask them.
accessible for... So this is not in context, but it's in utils, and utils is accessible from the template.
Yes.
Okay.
The way we've made utils accessible was by using this code in templates.py, where we said this is called a template global. So we can add whatever we want to these template globals, and these names are going to be available then in the templates. This is the idea being that this is not view-specific code, but it's more like utility functions that everyone will maybe need. So this UL class breadcrumb you should replace with your own code. You can maybe do a check. Yeah. So for the implementation, a hint is that you could use the first, actually all the items until the -1 index to build the list of inactive links, and then at the last position you might want to use the -1 item to render the last link, right? Because this one has a class active, the other ones have no class active, so there's maybe that's not that's going to be something to think about. Again, in folder PT is the code where you can look for the tal repeat syntax so that you, that's basically what you can copy. The folder PT also has this example of getting a URL for an item. You use the request object and its resource URL method to and pass it the context or the item that you want to get the URL for. So our models, they don't really know themselves how to construct the request. Takes that job. So once you're done, make sure that you have the active class set correctly. You want the last one in this list to be active, and the other ones should be links, and the last one shouldn't be a link. Yes?
I'd like to insert slashes or something between different items, but not at the last. So I need something like tal condition, repeat, not last, or so. I know it from tal in SOAP.
Right.
How is it done here?
It's you can use the same repeat variables that you know from tal and SOAP, basically. Yeah. Yeah, it might be dots instead of slash. But actually, for this example, what I'd suggest is that you make a separate tal repeat for the items except the last one, and then do the last one separately. But it's really up to you how you want to do this. So someone still needs more time, or who's gone already? Who's waiting? Okay, let me. Yeah, you can.
Just like item last.
You can do with the -1, right? It's a list.
Ah, yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah. So to get the last one, when you call utils.breadcrumbs, you're gonna be able to just index the last one using the normal list syntax. Well, let me let me show maybe a simplistic solution, and then for those of you who know how to do the active and make a separation of active and not active links, I'm just going to use the simple way where I say I need a repeat, just like in the folder example. I want to repeat for each item in utils.breadcrumbs. So this LE element is going to be repeated for each one of these items now. And then we need something like this link over here. Except that we're going to fill in what? Here we're going to put request resource URL item. What do we need here? The title. So that would be item.title, and what else? Let's leave it at this. With this code, you should get a somewhat working breadcrumbs, and you can try it out. Actually, this one you can try out without restarting, because the templates are already reloaded in development mode. You don't need to restart as I just did. So here you can see that we now have, it's funny, Chrome thinks this page is in Danish. No idea why. So here we have our breadcrumbs, and here was the code. So as I said, if you don't the next example already implements the solutions for the previous example, right? So if you're not confident or you want to look again, you can just do that maybe later, look at it again, how it worked exactly. This template syntax needs a little time to figure out exactly how it works. But okay, so we learned how to repeat over a list. And we learned how to use these guys to use our master template, and for now that's going to be plenty. And of course the substitution using the dollar and the curly brackets, right? But okay, templates is a complete story by itself, and if you want to learn more about these, they're quite powerful, they're quite flexible templating language. But as I said, you can also use another one. But if you want to learn more about these chameleon templates or page templates, as they are called, you might want to, in the README you have several links to the. If you open up in this example, the README, you're going to be able to find more information about, where to find the docs and so on. Okay? So hopefully everyone then understood how this template global stuff worked. Yeah? Okay. So in the X4 I actually have the real solution. X4 has the solution for this one. So when I look into the master PT, I can see, I've divided this thing into two lists, the breadcrumbs, and I'm using the up until the last item. I'm using these to do the first LE, and the last one gets its own LE, so it's more convenient for me to just.
I found an easier solution, maybe.
Uh-huh.
You have the possibility to access the repeat inside the loop.
Right.
So if you do a tal condition not repeat.item.end,
Right.
then you insert the separator.
Right.
Item.end.
Right. So inside of these loops, you have access to a number of convenient things. It's basically like enumeration, except that you have more available. Not only the index, but also is it odd or even, or is it the last item or the first? So these things you can look up in the documentation of these page templates and use them. But for now, let's maybe move to the next example. Okay. So if you open up X4. This is going to be an example where we do what? We'll add another model object. We call it page. So that's how we can add pages to our folders. It's all simple stuff, really. And then we're going to create HTML forms to be able to add, edit, and delete folders and pages. I will provide for you code for the page model. And I will give you code for the forms, but only for the folder. And you're going to adapt the forms code to also work for pages, okay? So that means we're going to introduce a new content type or model object, or however you want to call it, and then work with the new one and add forms. So let me, again, I need to install this into my environment, and this time you will notice that there is a couple of more dependencies that this X4 forms package requires, and these are the form related stuff packages that we're going to pull in. So again, same thing as before, using the virtualenv Python, we're going to call setup.py-develop. Okay. And for you, I think it's going to download deform and a couple of extra packages that we'll use to render our forms. So there's no form library inside of Pyramid. You'll need to use whatever form library you want to use. So you have the freedom there. And I am using the deform form library to show you how you could do forms with it. Okay, so so once you have this, you should be able to, start up the server, and there should be no error when starting up. So I'm going to continue with looking at the models py file inside of X4 forms. Okay. So the folder one is the one that we already know. There were no changes to this one. I just removed all the comments. And this is our new model. And notice how it's really similar. It also has an init, but it's not a folder. Therefore, it's not a persistent mapping. It will still inherit from the persistent ZDB class. What's happening here is that we don't have a set item. We don't need to worry about putting items into our page because the page are always leaf nodes in our object directory structure or object graph. So this is simple, right? Title, description. Now we also have a body, and we want this body to be HTML, so we can put rich text into our pages. The app maker, I've extended the app maker a little bit so that on the first startup of the application we'll also we'll add a root as we did before, and now we're going to add a about page. Okay, and notice how I'm putting HTML into the body attribute, and I'm adding again the page to the app root, so that means /about is hopefully going to show our page. So if you're, once we've done this, we could use bin pserv, start up our application, visit the page, and now you see that the about has already been added by the startup code, and so this link is going to work. Again, /about is pointing. Now we also have a page, right? I already added a separate view for the page item, and that's an interesting one because now we have two views, and we have one, and the way that we distinguish them is by the context, right? So let's take a look at the code, at how these two views are differ in the registration, and how Pyramid finds the one or the other. And that's basically by looking at the context of the view configuration. So the folder view, which is connected to the folder PT template, is registered for the folder context. So for any folder, this is the one that we already saw, and the page view is registered for the context of a page, right? And this one has a different template. So this is why we see the body, and we don't, like, we can see that extra attribute of our page. So let's look at templates page PT. This page TP looks really similar in that it has the same fill slot and so on, and the same H1 code. Down here is what the new stuff, the structure context body. So context body being the HTML body that we set as an attribute before. Here, the thing is, so let us try and remove the structure and see what it does. The structure is actually in place so that our template doesn't escape the HTML, right? Because normally the template doesn't expect these attributes to have HTML, but in this case we're telling it, by using a structure keyword, we're telling the template that, it's okay to render this as HTML. So if I remove this one, right, and I visit this one, I can see that the HTML was escaped, so that now I can see the tags. This is the effect of using structure. So with structure, I can see that the body is now in italic as it should be. Right, and so further down in the views pie, where was this? Going back to here, going back to the views pie, now that we looked at page view and folder view, we're going to look at how to create a form for our folder, okay? And as I said, this is actually not part of the Pyramid core. You can use any form library that you want. And we're using something called Colander and Dform, which is two libraries that go hand in hand. for creating schemas and form HTML, so web forms. And the schema is, okay, this is, this could be like a ORM schema or schemas that you know from other form libraries if you use them. So what we're saying here is that the folder schema corresponding to the attributes that we have on the folder, we say that there is going to be a title. We want a title in our form. We want a description in our form. They're both of type string. This is what this code says. The description is going to use a different widget, so not the default widget that's used for the title, which is just a text line. This is going to use a text area. And this missing, what it says is that if there's been no input, the input should be an empty string. And by this, we will automatically make the field not required. This is how calendar schemas work, basically. So what we have down here is something interesting. We have our first class-based view. So Pyramid supports class-based views. This one inherits from form view, which I'm importing from a package called Pyramid Deform, which is kind of a glue package between Pyramid and the Deform form library, which actually itself knows nothing about Deform. So what we have here is a couple of interesting things. But first off, notice how our view is registered for folder. So that's going to be our add folder form, right? For adding a new folder to another folder. So this is now the first time that we use this name configuration option, which basically this name, if you put this inside of view registration, it means that this is going to be the last part of the URL. Look at this example over here. Slash would be our root folder, and without providing the name, so just by saying slash, just by traversing up to the object and not having any more path elements, like so, we would go to the view that has no name, basically, right? But if we register our view with a name, we can add another path segment that corresponds to the view's name, right? So this way we can have more than one view for a given object. So again, like this, what we call this is the default view. It has no name. So if you just go to the path that corresponds to the item that you traverse to, then this is the default view that's being used. That is the one without a name, right? Notice here, no name. So that means this one's going to be used. Down here we have a name. So this one is only going to be used if we add folder at the end of the URL, right? Look at this one. I'll try it out. Add folder. And then you can see our form. So here I can say, I'm going to make a tutorial folder. So the title is required, description is not. And there's my folder.
How does it know the title is required?
Oh, that was in the schema. How does it know the title was required? The title is here. It does not have this missing parameter, that's why. So by default they're required, and you have to put the missing to make them not required, to tell it what value to use instead of no value. Right, so the next parameter for this view registration is again a renderer, but this time we're going to use a generic form PT, which is really quite a simple template. It looks like this. Actually, you know what, I should. This is just the equivalent of. I shouldn't introduce this. So what we have here, was that a replace? Maybe. But so the idea is that what we're accessing here is the form is already returned as HTML from our form library. So we're not going to build the HTML by hand. We're just going to put it inside the HTML source. And then we have here in the H1, we have view.title. So let's see what this could be. What is the view? The view is going to be the instance of this view class, okay? And there you have the title. So what's happening here is that we have access to another object. So before we had context request. Now we also have a view object that we can access in our template. And the view object is an instance of our view class, right? So you might want to, maybe you want to have additional methods here, that's fine. Or you have additional attributes. Here I'm putting the title add folder so that I can show my users, you know, what they're actually doing here. So this is what gets replaced when I go to add folder. Or alternatively, I've actually already put a link over there. So this is another folder. And oops, I wanted to actually show this one. This is the title that I get from the view. So what I'd like to do next is, let's take a closer look at this form view. This is inheriting from this class called form view. I'm not going to go into all the details. Again, if you need to understand this more, you should look at the README. It has the links and the names to the libraries that are being used. But what's most interesting here is that we define the schema that the form uses. That's the thing that we define up there with the title and description. We define the buttons. This corresponds to what we see down here. And we define the button handler down there. So the save from the button up there corresponds to the save as a prefix here for this method name. And what happens here is that you can, after a validated input, so if the schema allowed the input, then this save success is called, and we can use this abstract to create our folder. And what is this abstract? You can see how I'm creating it at the line that's highlighted. This abstract is a dict that corresponds to the fields of my schema. So I have an entry called title, I have an entry called description in this dict. So basically, it'll look at this schema and give you a dict that corresponds to this schema in your success method. So you'll have, you know, imagine title, my folder, and then I put a description. This is the abstract, right? This is what you get. So we can use this star notation to instantiate a folder. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to lowercase the title and use it as the path, segment, or the name of the object, right?
I didn't get where the form comes from. I didn't get where the form comes from in the template in the form PT. There is a structure form.
Right. That's handled by the base class. The form view base class has a call method. So notice that we're inheriting from a form view, and this is doing that job for us. So it's doing it retrieves the request, it does the validation using our schema. If the validation was okay, it's going to call our save success, and if that save success, you know, in this case, and we're returning a redirect and so on. If there was no input, it's gonna return the form. I mean, I can show you the code. It's basically in pyramid D form, right? Let's see. Pyramid D form. So you don't really need to understand this to be able to follow what we've been doing, but you can see that there's some logic here for example, here it gets our success method, right? If that button was in the post, so this is really the hard work happening here. And down there you can see, you know, how it calls form e-render, and this is what you actually get in the template, right? And notice class-based views, they always have a call, which is the entry point. So this is what you should, before we used functions, now we use classes, so we have the call. And in this call, we should return then our dictionary or whatever we want to use in our template. So the thing is still the same, but now you can use different methods to, and it's oftentimes it's easier to test class-based views if you have separated your functionality into different methods, as opposed to, you know, having it all. If it's a lot of logic, you don't want to have it all inside one function. So this is the advantage of this class-based stuff. Okay, but let's not go into that concrete base class too much. You can look at this later. It's basically handling all this stuff for you. You know, there's a failure handler and so on and so forth. But what's already working is that, you know, there's validation going, and if you leave out a required field, you already get this. So it's quite convenient. So what I'd like you to do now is, let's take a quick look at the edit. That's a very similar one. It's also form view. It's also class-based view. Context is folder. Now the name is edit, right? So this is my root folder. I can put edit to edit its fields. And you know, the same goes for, do I have any other folders? This is my folder. I can append edit at the end to go to the edit form, and I've already provided the link for you here, so you can you know, switch between what we already have now. This is the default view. Notice this goes just to slash, and this one goes to slash edit. This one goes to slash add folder, and this one goes to add page, which I haven't implemented yet, but which you should implement. Notice this, when you go to add page, there's no view. And if you go to a page like about, this is now a page, not a folder. There is no edit for pages, right? So this is the two views. They are corresponding to folder edit and folder add. For the folder class, you should now make a page add and page edit for the page class, but just a little bit of more context. In the edit one, in the add view that we saw just before, we are actually constructing a new folder, as you saw, and then putting it into the context. The context here is our folder, right? Remember, we say blah 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 folder, add folder, so the context is the blah 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 folder, and then we put it inside this folder. And so context is the parent of our newly created folder. And down here the situation is different, because here we're editing the folder, so the context becomes the object that we actually want to edit, right? So the abstract, again, we're using the same schema, so the abstract again has title and description inside. This is just some, you know, giving a nice message to the user. And here we have a usage of a redirect. This corresponds to a pyramid finding another URL after the success. So you can see the success, and then you can see the view of the object again. So it's important to understand that here, what we traverse to add folder, here the context is my folder, as you see up there, the context of the view. And for edit, it's also my folder, but the difference being that here we want to add into the context, and here we want to change the attributes of the context. By add in, I mean using the dict access to go inside. So if you want, you can now maybe start out by copying the folder add and folder edit, and then adapt it to, you know, there's some section here 3 classes that you're gonna need, and then you can hopefully see that add and edit pages, those pages for the page item also. So I'm gonna give maybe 7 minutes for this one, because there's a whole lot of more stuff. Mm-hmm. So 2 things that people have noticed is that the form code isn't perfect. It's supposed to be an example, but there is one problem where in the add form, but don't worry about this for now. This is stuff that you could fix maybe as an exercise or so, but I've ignored it, which is that when you do this and there's already an entry with the name, it's going to be overwritten. So you don't have any feedback here saying that do you really want to overwrite, or actually maybe you could also change the name or add a 1 or a 2 at the end, to not accidentally overwrite already existing folders. And then there is also the problem if you call your context if the name corresponds to the name of your view, then but this is something that we can almost ignore for now. There is, but generally there is the issue that if you had an item that's called edit, then it would be it would be ambiguous which one you actually want. Do you want the view or do you want the item called edit? And therefore we have something with we have this add where we can distinguish them, right? So the add edit will always go to the view, and without the add it will always prefer the context, I believe, right? This way around, yeah. Okay, so it's by copying what these three classes, we should be able to and make sure that you register things for the right context. Like your page edit is gonna have a context of page. The name can be the same. The renderer can be the same. And basically lots of this code is just going to be very similar. Once you're completed with this code, you should be able to click the add page link, and you should be able to click the edit link for pages. No extra templates required. Hopefully by now you'll also get a sense of how this traversal stuff is nice to map a hierarchical structure that maybe you know from a content management system where you have an arbitrary tree of items and arbitrary URLs that can't be constructed using routes, and that are actually pretty nice to read. And you can just think about it like a file system where we put views on top. Is the deform, does it come with Pyramid? No, there is no choice for a form framework in Pyramid, so you can choose whatever you're most comfortable with, but it turns out that maybe a lot of people that use Pyramid use deform for their forms. But there's also, people using form encode or whatever form library is really they like the best. It works. Anyone who still wants some more time to explore, or? Sorry? Ah, yeah. Yeah, you could do that. I mean, right. You should then implement the cancel success, I guess. Or actually, that does make a lot of sense. But you should definitely start out by adding to this tuple the other button, and I think it's gonna look for the cancel success, I guess. Right, this is the code that will be called. Alright, so let me, because there's really not a lot of time left, but I still want to, maybe in this last 45 minutes, I'm going to give you more of an overview, and you should, I think, encourage you maybe to look at the readmes after the tutorial and go through it again to be able to understand. There is also a few examples that you can code yourself. By the way, if you have troubles, you go home and there's an issue, you can contact the pyramid users list. There is a, or is it Pylons, I think it's called. So you're going to be able, or on IRC, you're going to be able to find people willing to help with your problems. Let's switch over to the, not going to show the solution, it's just there in the X5, right? So if you, again, so this X5, let's install it again. I'm going to change into X5. I'm going to, bin Python setup by develop. This way I have now X5 users in my virtual environment. So in this example, we're going to look at adding a user model so that we can have users in our system to do authentication, and we'll also allow new users to register. So we're going to make a login form, again using the same form approach that we just saw, and we're going to use we're going to learn about how to do authentication, how the login method works. So authentication and authorization, that is, authentication is who's logged in, determining that, and authorization is what are they allowed to do. They are both pluggable in Pyramid. That is, you can use different authentication mechanisms with ease, and there is packages available for different kinds of authentication backends. Let's start by looking into the init py of our X5 user. In the main, you can see that we have now a couple more configurations going on. For our authentication mechanism to work, we need something called a session factory. Actually, we already needed this for the last example, for the flash messages, because they're using sessions. Again, the kind of session backend that you use is completely pluggable. And then what we have down here is we're configuring the authentication and authorization policy in our application. So what we do is we use the auth ticket authentication policy, which is based on cookies. to do our authentication, and we're gonna use the ACL authorization policy. Both of these are part of the Pyramid core, but there's more packages that you can use for this kind of stuff. And so this is how you create and configure authentication and authorization policies. In the init.py there is now a function called getUser. This one's using the Python, the Pyramid, API to get hold of user object and return it. The way we'll handle user objects is we're going to treat user objects as folders, so they're going to be the same thing. So it's like, imagine like in GitHub you have your username, and then inside of that folder you have your own stuff. So what we're doing is we create the username as a folder in the root, and then inside of that username is where the user's space is, where they are allowed to add and edit content. And so the getUser will call the Pyramid API to get the authenticated user ID, which will in turn call our authentication policy to retrieve that. If user ID is none, return none, and then try to get the object that corresponds to that user. So we want to get the folder. Let's look at that. In the models we have now another model. So now we have 3 models: folder, page, and now we have user. User inherits from folder, and it adds a couple of attributes. It adds email, password, and followers. So we also put a validate password. We try to be somewhat secure, but we're not really about hashing the password. And here we have a method called validate password for our login logic. So what we're doing is we also have to create our own login form and everything. This isn't part of Pyramid itself, so we are rolling our own in this case. But I should mention that there's packages out there that will provide this functionality also for you if you wanna if you don't need that level of customization. You can just use packages like Apex or other libraries. So so what I'm doing here, in addition to these 2 pages, I'm also adding to the root an admin node, an admin item, a user item with the name admin, and this is my site administrator account. And so I should be able to log in using admin, right? Because I instantiate my user like so. Again, sorry if this is going a bit quick, but so here you have also the solutions for the page stuff. So in login.py I defined the login related views. Look at that. You'll see a schema again, like we saw it. A login schema for username and password, and you're gonna see another form. This time we're using this one not to save any changes, but to log in the user. Okay, so this is coming from the abstract is coming again from the form. We use our getUser that we created before to try and get the authenticated user with that username. So this is a bit inside out, but the idea is that at this point, how is it? I have to admit that I don't really understand why the self-bad login happens to be up there actually, but look at this code down here. After a successful, oh yeah, sure. What we're doing is we get the user object in the first line, and we try to validate the password. And if that's the wrong password, we say login failure, which is another method of our view. Where is that?
Should be bad login as well.
That should be bad login, probably. Yeah, you're right. Sorry? I didn't understand the question. Say it again, please.
So the question, sorry. That I think that the form toolkit creates, according to the action you define the buttons, also by default the login success function and the login failure function. And so you're actually overriding the login success function that...
no, it actually doesn't create it. If it's not there, it's an error. You'll immediately see an error.
Okay.
So I think that was a mistake. I renamed the method, but I didn't rename all of the calls. And of course, this code is all untested, so I didn't notice. So the remember is what helps us to delegate to our authentication policy to say, please remember that this user is logged in. In this case, we're setting a cookie, and so next time we try to get the authenticated user, we'll just be able to get that. And the logout is simple but similar. So that's just a link, and what happens here is that we call the pyramid security forget. So remember and forget. Remember when you've logged in successfully. Remember that this guy is logged in, and forget the guy when he wants to log out. So this way we should be able to open our application. Bin pserv development ini again. These guys, these applications, they will all use new databases, right? But you can see the data FS that's inside the directory. That's what's containing your data. So now we have the admin user, and we should be able to sign in. This is our form, admin, and you can see that there is now code that will show me up here a link to the logout. So I registered the logout just like usually with the name logout, but here I'm saying that I'm actually not providing a context. So logout is in fact available anywhere in the site, but that doesn't really matter for this for us right now. So so here we have our new user object. That's the site administrator, and the site administrator can now add items in here. And what I'd like you to do is look at the example in the models pie where we are adding the admin user. Try to use code like this in your own view. And call that view registration, put it into the login. I already provided you with the registration schema, and you should complete the registration class, the view class. So this is the steps that you'll need to do here. What we need to do is we allow people to register. Can we look at the form already? I think we can. Let's see. Register. Here's the form, right? So after clicking register here, we want to create this user object and also log in the user immediately after they registered. So this is quite of a simplistic approach, right? Normally you would ask your user for email confirmation or something like that. But here, let's just on register. So we're going to create a user object, add the user object to the root, use the remember function to log in the user immediately, and display a success message. All of these parts you should be able to find in other places in the code, like create the user object is in models.py. Add the user is the same. This is in login, and this you should also be able to find right here, actually, in this same method. Once you completed this code, you should be able to register new users. Mm-hmm. I have each individual user is a folder object. So what we're using this for is that we're going to make this folder the user's workspace, so that kind of maps to our application. This fab collab stuff. So once we have all the users, the next step we want to do is we want to so we're going to allow users to only add stuff into their own folders using the ACL, and then we want to be able also to share. So users are going to be able to add a folder inside their own workspace and then share this with other folders so that they can maybe work on it together. All right, maybe is there someone who has already got the solutions for this and can register his users or her? Okay, let's leave a little bit. That's an interesting question. How do you get the app root? Notice that the register, when we call it, sorry? That you can call that get root. Where is that? That's in. I think we have. You can use that root factory function of ours. This one, right? If you just call this one, this will always give you the root. Basically, I think there's also request.root actually. Yeah? Right. So I guess you could use that, or just for now rely on the context being the root, because that's also true. Because we call our register on. That's a bit of a dirty one, but good. This application has its some rough edges, but this is hopefully something that you would be able to figure out yourself to, maybe not allow people to call register just anywhere in your site. And so you're going to need to see what is in the abstract. There is the username. And then there's more, which is, maybe I forgot to mention that, but you can see in the comments here, the registration schema inherits from login schema, which means that it inherits its fields also. So that means we already have username and password here. That's why we see it in the form already. So in addition to these username and password fields, we will add full name and email. And that's what we use down here in our form view. It works? The message? Right, the message should be quite easy. You can use code like here. Notice how in the message I can pass error or success, and this will give me different colors. So it's working for you? No, sorry. No. Wait, I think it's encoded, right? Or you should encode it. Yeah, you should encode it if it's right. So it can be Unicode in that case. So if the user takes care of that, please.
Is there a reason to use pop on the abstract structure, or should you just use get?
Yeah, you can use get just as well. I just wanted to make it easier for the code down there, but I guess that was just confusing. So yeah, that's just a normal dict. So okay, let's because we hurry up a little, I'm gonna look at the solution, at least the one that I made. That one's in X6, where you can compare it with your own code. So here is how I, that pop didn't make any sense there, right? So this is how I, oh yeah, okay. There's some code up here, so that's where we create the object. Yeah, there's self-request root right there. This is how we create the user object and put it as a folder into our root. And down here, we're using the remember to log in the user straight away, and then display a message, and then do a redirect. So this is the solution. and this in between is something else that we have to do now in this exercise. So so now we're going to talk about, this is actually x6 is the last example, the last step, and then x7 has the solutions for this last step, and it's kind of an open-ended. x6 has a couple of, if you look at the README of x6, it has a couple of things that are improved with the existing application. So, you know, could be that later in the day or you might want to continue with that one. But what I want to talk about here before we wrap up is the ACL. And so remember that we used ACL authorization in our init. So this is just how we defined that policy. And ACLs, they work like this. Let's look at an example in the models. Here is the only bit of code that I added in the models py. And this is basically saying that, you know, the uproot is the slash object, or object corresponding to the slash again. And here, notice that I'm assigning to a special attribute called under ACL, under. And that's a list, that's an access control list that defines permissions in that root object. So what we're saying here is that we have a list and it has one entry, and this is called the access control entry, I guess. This is saying, as you can read, allow admin all permissions. All permissions is the permission in this case. It's a special permission. So the idea is that we can now guard our views with certain permissions, and they're going to be checked against the ACL. So you can see, basically what this means is that however we guard our views, the admin is going to have that permission that we require. And how does that work? So remember our views. That's x6, right? So in our views, we still have folder view, page view. I didn't change anything there. And then I have the add folder. And here I added a permission argument to this one, right? And this basically means that this view should only be accessible to users that have the add permission in the context. Okay? So this is, I don't know if you're familiar with the SOAP or Plone, you should know about this. If you don't know about it, it's a really useful and an intuitive way to allow users access to certain parts of your site, of your structure. You know, it could be that you have it maps very well to organizations and, you know, groups of people having different roles in different parts of your site. This permission add means, okay, check if there is an ACL that says that the current user has the add permission. So check if for the current user there is in my ACL attribute there is an allow currently logged in user and then add. And in this case, okay, this all permissions is basically star, or it matches any permission. But imagine that, you know, I would like myself to have add permission, and I would like myself to have, just as an example, I want to have an edit permission also inside the root. And the nice thing about this is we're going to use this for our users, folders, okay? So each user will get permissions to add and edit content only within their own user folder, okay? So, and the nice thing here also is that these are inherited down the tree, okay? And this is really useful. Because if you say that, imagine you have a user folder called Daniel, and you can put these two ACEs, you can assign them into the ACL of Daniel's user folder. The effect is then that Daniel can add and edit not only in this folder but in all of the child folders as well, or items, right? This is what's actually pretty intuitive in this hierarchy there, which you can use to nicely map user permissions. So what I'd like to do now is go into the login Pi. What I'd like you to do now is to take a look at, compare with the code in the models Pi, and take maybe 5 minutes or so to try and assign the ACL to the user object that you created in the registration. So this is the registration code that we looked at just before. What we don't want to do now is we want to assign here an ACL that will allow the user to do what? To do add and edit objects. So what you need to do is, just as in the example before where I showed you, you'll need to replace this one by the user's name and the third item of the tuple by the permissions that you're interested in, and you're going to need two tuples in this list, right? One for the first permission, one for the second permission, which is add and edit. So this basically reads as, as what? As grant the admin user all permissions on this object and below, and this way the admin user gets all permissions in the whole site, and this is what we want for the admin. This is actually wrong. Again, there is extensive. You can read up in more detail. This should be views. So once you're done and you're logged in with your user, you should be able to see that you can only add and edit items in that particular user's folder. When you're logged in as a new user that you just registered, then you'll notice that trying to visit the add folder is only going to work inside your own folder. It's not going to work in the root anymore. This will give you a permission error. So that code is here, right? Okay, great. So Pyramid also has a function called hasPermission, which I'm using in the template. Remember, we had these links on the left side. I'm using hasPermission to guard, also to not display the links, right? Because the effect of these links here is that the master PT has the edit and add links as before. And so the inconvenience here is that the edit and add folder and add page are still going to be visible even if the user doesn't actually have the permission to visit that page, right? So that's why we need the has permission function to not display these links. And that's out of pyramid security has permission. So once you're done with this ACL stuff and you can see it work, like you can't add folders for your own user in the root and stuff, then you can go on and go back to the template utils class. And that was in templates py, if you remember. And then time to get up. Sorry, go into the templates py and look at the template utils. And so basically you need to add code here to allow the templates to call code like this, right? We want to be able to say, and this is also something new in our templates, we haven't used this yet, this tal condition stuff, which basically means that this should be true, otherwise I'm not going to display this LE at all, right? So you can use this. And notice it's calling utils again corresponding to this class, and then has permission on it. And has permission edit should return true if the user has permission on the current context. So the trick is first you'll import pyramid security has permission, which is the API, and then you're going to make a convenient version of that has permission function available to your templates. The thing with has permission is that it takes permission context request. Because our template utils object already knows about request, it will implicitly know about context because that's just self-request.context, and then it will just need to get past the actual permission that we're interested in, right? So you can say here def has permission and then make a call to pyramids has permission where you fill in the missing bits, which are context and request from self. So this way you have a has permission available in your templates, utils that has permission, and you're going to be able to not show the links that are not that shouldn't be shown for the current user, right? So there's two ways of guarding things here. The has permission is for our user interface, so that we don't even display the links that are not visible to certain users. And the view configuration is what's actually going to block users from being able to enter the view at all, right? So you can't, if you lack that permission, you don't need to worry about further down in your view to make further checks about the permission, because that's been done for you implicitly by Pyramid by providing that parameter to the view config, which is called permission. Remember that again here in views. Yeah, so the idea is that you make here a def has permission, and then you can call utils like this. For this, you'll need to import this guy from here. So again, in the views, notice how we also, this is the permissions, this is corresponding to the third item in our ACL tuples. So we have even fine-grained control over who can edit and who can add items. We could be restricting one but not the other, because the add, the page add view has a different permission attached to it. But we want to grant both of these permissions to that user. So what we're going to do is inside the login py, we're going to say user ACL, I'm gonna look at maybe like allow what is it, username, right? And then add, and then also edit. So this way we can allow that user that corresponds to this folder to gain these permissions. And yeah, here you just need to fix the imports. That's why it's red. So unfortunately, there's only 5 minutes left. So what I'm going to show you is the final application. Okay. Remember, in the README TXT, there is more stuff to do. So if you're done with the registration code, this one, and you're done with the what was the other one? With the has permission, thanks. Then you could move on and follow the README TXT to allow users to collaboratively work on something. I mean, it's in a quite a restricted way. It's obviously missing some features for a nicely polished application, but so you get an idea. I can change into the X4, X7, I guess. So what do I have? This is kind of the final application with. You can see that it's not displaying no longer these, so it has the has permission there. I already have a Daniel user here. I can sign in with that user. You can see that in the root I only have the view permission, basically, the permission to access the view, because I has permissioned the other one. And if I go in here, you can see that I have more options because I'm inside of my folder. So if I'm going to add a folder here, you know, that's my backyard. So so what I've added here is that I can now share pages also. Okay, so that means let me go into my backyard folder. This is described in the README TXT how you could proceed to implement this, but it's actually just a matter of changing the ACL again with someone else's username, right? So if you add into the ACL of that particular folder, the folder that the user wants to share, you put into that ACL the corresponding permissions. You can actually have something like this where you say share item with, you know, this is, I don't have any other user, but you get the idea, right? So that this user now can visit that folder and has edit and add permissions inside of that folder. And this is one of the exercises to complete the X6. The other one is a simple list of followers. So you can see that the users, we already created them with a followers equals none. These followers are just a list of other user objects, right? So you can implement something simple like a follow button where when one user clicks on it, then I can show you here how it works. Here's the admin, right? I can follow the admin and then I just I'm adding +1 to the list of followers. So now I could actually go inside and let's take a quick look with the P shell. What I could do is I could look into the admin and then look at the list of followers. And okay, you can, that's actually a user object right there. Let me get the 0 element. This is my user. It just has a funny wrapper because it's also a dictionary, but we didn't care about that yet. We could have made a nicer wrapper for this one, but you can see that the class is a user. So we have a list of users, and again, we don't need to do any fancy mapping or you know, in SQL Alchemy, this would be you'd have to do some further configuration. Here, what we can do is, because we're using the ZODB, we just I think it's follow. Right here is the example, and it's just you can see it's just appending to a list, right? And it's appending the object, and that's it. And down here, we're doing the opposite. So that's pretty much it. Again, there is the mailing list, or IRC if you need some more help, or you can just, while I'm here until Monday, so you can just walk up and talk to me if you have questions or ideas or whatever. And I guess that's it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I think even if we didn't finish all the exercises, it was very useful because people had time to try and practice the various steps. Thank you again.